Hello? Hi, can everyone hear me? We're gonna get started. So if people are trickling in, that's fine, but just ask it when you come in if you could just kindly find a seat so we can get started for the CEU portion of today's conference. I'm Laura Foster. I'm one of the board members for Harvest Full of Hope. Just a quick housekeeping note on the CEUs. If you do need CEUs for licensure, like for state licensure, just make sure you sign in out front. You only have to sign in once this year. Kindly mark if you're an NASW member or not. And then at the end of the conference, we will send out an email where you can just link for your evaluation and to pay like the NASW fees. But outside of that, it's free for the CEUs. There's 4 altogether. Included in that is the Lunch and Learn, which all of them will be up here. So for folks that are doing that, just make sure you kind of stay in this area. And just honor system, if you session, just like when you are doing your evaluation, right, for 3 CEUs instead of 4 if you miss lunch or something along those lines. Feel free to come up to me if you have any questions afterwards. And apologies for the late start. We're going to try to get back on track here with Bill. If it goes a little bit later, we'll just kind of stack the breaks a little bit moving forward after that. So it is my pleasure to introduce Bill Arnold, whose remarkable career spans more than 45 years of service across counseling, chaplaincy, and community leadership. Bill's professional journey bridges the sacred and the clinical. As a former ordained clergy and now a board-certified counselor, he has guided individuals and families through addiction, recovery, grief, and life transitions with compassion and expertise. His credentials speak to his commitment. He is a certified advanced alcohol and drug counselor, a certified advanced grief counselor, certified trauma professional, and certified specialist in anger management, among many others. Currently, Bill is semi-retired and provides services through Solace Counseling, the Oasis Community Center, and Mid-Atlantic Rehabilitation Services. Bill holds a master's in arts of clinical counseling from Moravian Theological Seminary and a master's of divinity from United Theological Seminary. His blend of pastoral wisdom and clinical skill makes him a trusted voice in trauma-informed care, substance use treatment, and grief counseling. Please join me in welcoming Bill to share his thoughts on the intersection of addiction and grief. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm wondering if Bill would come forward. I listened to all that, so I guess the only thing I'd like to say, yes, I'm old. And I was sitting listening in the back to the panel, and one of the things I was remembering is going to a cardiologist appointment recently, and the cardiologist walked the room and said, "You look better in person than on paper." So I'm hoping to share with you about the intersection of grief and addiction, but I have this feeling that we need to do one thing together really quick. So mindfulness breathing is a really important part of my life, and I'm wondering if together we could just do 3 rounds of triangular breathing. So we're going to do breathe in through our nose to the count of 4. We're going to hold it for the count of, let's make it easy, 3, and we're going to blow it out like we're blowing out a candle over here for 5 or 6, whatever works for you. I'll count, you breathe, okay? I'll breathe a little bit here and there too. So let's try the first one. So in through our nose, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3. Blow it out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then again, breathe in through your nose, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Blow it out like a candle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And one more time, breathe in through your nose, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4, sorry. And now blow it out through your mouth, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so let's get started. I want to start with a little bit of humor, because maybe that will help me relax. So it should go that way. Can't see it? Here it is. Okay. So when a FedEx truck and a UPS truck collide on a snow-covered road, The joke says you get a new industry, fed up. So the word fed up is funny, but it fuses together two delivery giants into one exhausted and frustrated expression of our time. What if we do the same thing with our professional, personal, and lives and okay, school. The screens are different here than they are there. But what if we take this into our own human experience? What happens when grief and addiction collide? You get something equally absurd, I believe, but something tragically real, something I want to call gradiction. Now, gradiction is not in the dictionary, don't look for it, but maybe it should be. It's what happens when the weight of a loss intersects with the depression for relief. Grief on its own is brutal. A landscape where love has nowhere to go. Addiction on its own is relentless. A cycle where escape becomes a cage. Combine the two, and you get a whole new condition, a whole new relationship. Society prefers that we not mess it up. Society prefers that we keep it neat and clean. This is true with grief. This is true with addiction. Keep it clean. Don't mess it up. Don't mix them together. Merging them is problematic. But probably today, for our sake, taking that first step and understanding the intersection of grief and addiction may be helpful. There we go. So for 50 years, I've been walking aside of those who have a behavior that could be seen as an addictive behavior, or those with sharing a loss, a loved one, a loss of a job, a loss of a friend, a loss of a set of keys, a loss of hopes, of dreams, of promises, of relationships, whatever it might be. Those have been lives that have been hijacked by an addictive behavior. Those have been lives of those who carry the sorrow of losing a loved one through aging, as we just heard, through disease, through accident, or heartbreakingly through the last recent years, through substance abuse overdose. Those mourning quieter everyday losses, as I mentioned before, relationship, jobs, fading identity, dreams. Nearly 50 years ago, in an emergency room in the Children's Hospital of Dayton, Ohio, I met a 6-year-old girl. She was wonderful. She lay in the hospital, the emergency bed, and kept trying to feed me some of the chocolate Easter bunny eggs from the day before. And aside of me stood her parents, who were concerned because her temperature was rising. It was only hours later that I stood with her parents aside of her lifeless body. And only days later that I helped her parents, held their hands as they signed papers to cease life support. That changed me. That changed who I am. That changed what I wanted to be. That changed what I wanted to say to whomever would listen. But nothing has changed me or reshaped me, I think, as much as what has happened to me in the last 13 years of working with MARS, Mid-Atlantic Rehabilitation, working with those with gambling addiction, working with those with anger addiction, working with those with a substance abuse, alcohol abuse, working with those who have an addictive behavior. And what does that mean? We'll talk. And then in the last 4 years, working at Oasis Community Center, being with parents who lost a child, lost a loved one through a substance abuse overdose. Those who are left behind bear the endless ripples of loss, whether shaped by a loved one's self-medication, or by isolation born of grief. Their pain reminds us of the intersection of grief and addiction. So here's what I've come to learn. Grief and addiction are distinct, and but are profoundly connected. Both involve a loss and a struggle to regain control, to regain meaning, and both unravel us. My task as I see it today is to explore how grief and addiction speak to each other through their contrasts and their connections. So let me start with an important distinction. Addiction yeah, my words were good, so I screwed it up. Addiction is a disease. That's what I wanted to say. Grief is not. That's the message. You'll hear some other stuff. Grief is not a requirement for medication where addiction may be or is. Gabriel Monte, one of my heroes, explains this through this short video.
All the substances of abuse, whether they're opiates or cocaine or anything else, they're actually painkillers. Some of them specifically are painkillers. But physical pain and emotional pain, the suffering is experienced in the same part of the brain. So when people suffer emotional rejection, the same part of the brain will light up as if you stuck them with a knife. The Eckhart Tolle says very nicely that addictions begin with pain and end with pain. So that all the addictions are attempts to soothe the pain. So when I work with addictions, the first question is always not why the addiction, but why the pain.
So let's not lose his thoughts, his sharing. The message is that anybody can have an addiction, and nobody chooses it. No one says, I want that. That rather, their addiction is a response to human suffering, to human pain. There's a professor in the United Kingdom called, his name is Dr. David Nutt. And he does MRI imaging of those who are using gambling devices while in the MRI. And his brain scans show how the brain lights up by just the wanting to go into a gambling experience, and then how it changes after gambling. His important words are these: gambling, or any addiction, is not a moral failure, not a failure of the will, but a changed brain, a brain with a disease that is preyed upon by the gambling industry, by the drug industry, by the tobacco industry, and others. Because addiction changes the brain, it's not simply a matter of wanting to stop. Willpower doesn't work. And even after you stop, things can linger. I'll never forget a police officer who came up and shared with me after a morning presentation, and he said, after listening to you this morning, the people I pull over in the future will have to thank you for me being less condemning, and more compassionate. Addiction behaves like every other disease that we have, every other chronic illness that we know. It disrupts function. It shortens our life expectancy. It requires long-term support. At its core, addiction is not about choice. It's about pain, disconnection, and the deep human need for relief and belonging. Grief, by contrast, is not something to be fixed, but something to feel. Dr. David Kessler reminds us with this statement: grief is not an illness to be cured, but an experience to be supported. Others who are my heroes, and there are too many, like Dr. William Worden, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Dr. Alan Wolfelt, remind us that grief is not a disorder and therefore does not require medication. And so I struggle a bit, but I stand firmly with those who caution that mislabeling and misreading grief as a depression or a need for medication only blurs the fragile line between healing and harm. As we continue our journey through grief and recovery, let's pause to look beneath the surface at two of the most hidden and powerful emotions that shape our healing: guilt and shame. Brené Brown, you all know who that is, writes, based on my research and the research of other shame researchers, I believe there is a profound difference between shame and guilt. She says, guilt is I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Understanding this distinction is crucial in both grief and recovery from an addictive behavior. Guilt can be constructive. It acknowledges our action. It motivates reflection. It encourages repair. It opens a pathway towards growth and healing. Shame, by contrast, attacks every sense we have, every sense of our identity, telling us, I'm a mistake. In so doing, it fuels secrecy, isolation, self-criticism, and can even drive addictive behaviors from grief to addiction. So grief whispers, I am grieving wrong. Why can't I hold it together? You may know the term disenfranchised grief, the grief that comes along with a grief that society will not recognize, doesn't want to hear about: substance abuse, overdose, divorce, miscarriage. Society puts shame in the place of connection. Society says, reinforcing that quiet message, don't talk about it. I don't want to see it. I'm uncomfortable. Don't make me more uncomfortable. And so with that in mind, I invite you to listen to about a minute and a half video from Stephen Colbert.
You wrote me a letter after my
And
mom
Anderson
died,
Cooper.
and in it you said, I hope you find peace in your grief. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how we don't really talk about grief and loss. People aren't comfortable talking about it. And one of the things I found in the last 2 months since my mom died is people coming up to me on the street or reaching out to me in Instagram or wherever and sharing their grief and sharing their loss with me. And I found that the most helpful thing. I found it to be the most powerful and moving thing. And I kind of oddly don't want that to stop, because in regular times people don't do that. And
well, I think when you meet someone who's had a loss, you have two options. One is to say, I'm sorry for your loss, which is a perfectly lovely thing to do. But if you can share your experience, then they're not alone.
well, it's always interesting to me how when I bring it up, meeting somebody for the first time, and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry to bring it up," and as if what they don't
if you wanna
realize
forget
is
the person who
I'm
died.
thinking about it all
Constantly.
the time. I mean,
Exactly.
it is, as you said,
Exactly.
it is, it's one of my arms. I mean, it is an extension of who I am.
Quite possibly for the rest of your life.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been 31 years since my brother died, and
Yeah.
more since my dad, and there's not a day that goes by I don't think about
To
it.
the point sometimes where I go like, why is nobody asking me about this? Honest to God, like my brother's died 45 years ago, and sometimes I go like, how come nobody's asking me about Paul? But how would they know to
Right.
ask? They don't know I'm thinking about him.
Right. and they would be uncomfortable to ask. I actually, this is going to sound weird, but for a long time, and probably still to this day, wish that I had a scar. I wish I had like a scar.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, like Harry, more like a Bond villain, like running down my face. That's unavoidable for people to see because it would just be a silent signal to everybody I meet that I'm not the person I was meant to be, or I'm not the person that I started out being.
But you're in.
So connection heals shame. Shame thrives in secrecy, isolation, whispering that we're not worthy. Recovery begins when that silence is broken. Connection restores dignity. It reassures the wounded self, you are not alone. It shares humanity. It shares the gradual grip of reality can change. Compassion heals guilt. While shame says, I'm bad, guilt says, I've done something bad. So, the opposite of addiction is not necessarily sobriety, it's connection. Connection transforms remorse into restitution, pain into purpose. Yes, I'm skipping, trying to save time. And this is aging. So, let me move on. Pain. Pain isolates, or pain can connect. It can drive us inward, cutting us off from others, or can open us to the shared vulnerability that binds all human experience. Both addiction and grief disrupt lives and relationships. When the two collide, they do not merely add to one another, they amplify each other, feeding on each other's intensity. Grief has triggers, and not everybody likes that word anymore, but it's kind of the word that dominates our understanding these days. Maybe it'll change soon. But grief has triggers such as an empty chair, a date on a calendar, a familiar sound, a familiar scent, a familiar place. Each carries that quiet message that stirs memory, that stirs longing, that stirs the need to be held. Addiction also has triggers: a bottle, a wisp of smoke, a hum, the pressure that builds when peace feels out of place, out of reach. But both remind us how easily the past can rise within the present, asking for compassion and judgment. In both, the body responds instantly and physically. Our heart rates change, our muscles tighten, and the brain floods signals of loss. You all know the work of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Let me share a brief piece that he says.
The body keeps the score. This was a pretty radical approach to thinking through trauma.
And it became a meme, which is an interesting thing to see, actually.
Well, I use it in my everyday language with my partner. And I've heard other people say the body keeps the score, the body keeps the score, when we're talking about how our body is holding on to those traumatic memories, traumatic things that have happened to us. For someone who has never read your book and doesn't even understand the base premise here, what is the base premise of the title there?
It's really that trauma is a visceral experience.
What does the visceral mean?
It's in your body. Heartbreak and gut wrench. You stiffen up. You surrender. You lose your power. You tighten up. That's really where trauma is lived.
I kind of see it as two approaches. You can either go, let's try and change the mind, which will then change the body downstream, or you can say, let's change the body, which will then change the mind.
Right.
Is
you
that...
could. But
So both grief and addiction are not signs of weakness. They are reflections of how profound impact can be. Life's losses, traumas, and overwhelming experiences leave marks on our minds and our bodies, shaping how we respond, how we cope, and how we can heal. Neuroscience offers insight to those intersections, showing how the brain and the body store processes, how they sometimes get stuck in patterns of trauma and loss. Understanding those mechanisms can help us as we try to help others. Grief is more than an emotion. Addiction, in turn, hijacks the same systems that grief pulls forward. This is why grief can make people vulnerable, and addiction can prolong that grief. Through connection, through therapy, through mindfulness, through stable routines of community, medication, and relearning, people can find safe space and healing. So healing does not come from denying pain, but from turning it inward with courage, compassion, and support. When we face pain in the presence of others, we begin to reclaim the parts of ourselves that suffered and were silenced. Both grief and addiction, paradoxically, are signs of life. They reveal that we have loved deeply, that we have longed intensely and struggled honestly. It is what it means to be human. Grief speaks to the depths of our attachment, while addiction to our yearnings for relief and desire to be connected as well. It is through that very human capacity to feel, to love, to ache, to reach, that recovery and renewal become possible. Pain becomes a teacher. It becomes a strength. It becomes a vulnerability. And what once felt broken begins to integrate into a wiser and more compassionate self. At their intersection, grief and addiction remind us that loss and longing often share the same roots. Oops. Yeah, no. Should be there. Anger shows up in both addiction and grief, though it wears different faces. In grief, anger arouses the loss of that which we call profoundly unfair, that which we call a why me loss, why me event. Beneath that anger lies love disrupted, lies helplessness exposed. We need to learn to honor that anger. In addiction, anger has more tangled roots. It often flows from trauma, from shame. After anger shows up defensively, self-destructively, hostilely, I can't say the word, I'm going to move over. It can mask pain and yet explains how the fury comes. So learning to recognize, to channel our emotions safely is essential for lasting recovery. Here are 4 strategies. Wrong slide, but we'll keep going. Nope. Okay. Something happened, but we lost the slide. That's all right. 4 strategies for integrating grief and addiction. Talk it out. Express it creatively. Move your body. Practice compassion. Anger is not the end of the story. especially in the intersection of grief and addiction. In grief, anger says, I love them, their loss matters to me. In addiction, anger says, I'm in pain, something has to change. So now the question, how do we heal? You know, it's funny, they're so out of sorts right now. It's just me. I've lost it. There are 5 essential pathways to support healing and grief. Connection, meaning human presence. Storytelling means sharing our experiences. And rituals, meaning practices like lighting candles, observing anniversaries, creating art projects, doing tangible things that express our loss, our grief. Yeah, okay, there we go, finally. Healing involves the body as well as the mind. Healing does not erase the loss, but integrates it into life. Healing does not erase the loss. It does not pretend that the pain never happened. It rather helps us reclaim our sense of identity, our self-esteem, our autonomy, our agency, our sense of purpose. In grief, we integrate love and our loss into the ongoing story of our lives and our work. Both grief and addiction require courage, persistence, and support. So hope. When grief and addiction collide, life becomes messy, painful, full of questions, without easy answers. And yet, there's room for hope. Not a light, naive hope, but a rugged, steady kind of hope that shows up in the dark and whispers, maybe not today, but someday. Hope doesn't deny or minimize our loss. It's a fragile belief that healing is possible and that meaning can emerge from what feels unbearable and that connection can grow again. It says, this moment is not the whole story. So we need to start small. Survival becomes endurance. I'll try again tomorrow. Over time, hope shifts from mere survival to healing, from I can't get through this to maybe I can live again. Hope grows in connection. It thrives when someone listens without judgment, when a friend, sponsor, a therapist, a fellow traveler simply shows up. Grief meetings, grief groups, community spaces remind us that healing is a we process, not a me process. At its deepest level, hope does not erase pain, it coexists with it. It allows us to grieve and to grow. It transforms suffering into meaning. As Viktor Frankl described, turning our pain into a light for others. Hope in the intersection of grief and addiction is the courage to keep showing up, to breathe through the hurt, to reach out, despite the shame, to believe, without proof, that love, connection, and purpose are still possible. It doesn't erase the wound, but it allows life to grow deeper because of it. So as we close, I would like to ask you to remember a few essentials. Grief and addiction arise both from deep human pain. Healing begins with presence and compassion. Recovery and grief are journeys, not destinations. A better question, instead of saying, what's wrong with you, is saying, what happened to you. And I recommend the book by Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Perry. At the intersection of grief and addiction, where pain is raw and losses feel overwhelming, presence can be a lifeline. Grief and addiction are not moral failures. They are profoundly human responses to suffering. Compassion changes everything. It is the antidote to shame and isolation. Through these years of standing with those who are grieving a loss or sharing with me their addictive behavior, I have learned to understand these essential truths. Healing, as I said, is not a destination. Grief and recovery come in waves with setbacks and breakthroughs, and that you can be the bridge from pain to possibility. So as I wrap up and allow you to get ready to go into your next workshop, into lunch, I want to leave you with these thoughts. Pause before judging. Ask what happened, not what's wrong with you. Show up, even in silence. Hold space for grief and hold space for recovery. Be the difference in someone's story. At the intersection where grief and addiction meet, your presence can be the lifeline. I thank you for walking with me this morning on this journey, and I apologize for getting confused with slides. Thank you very much.